Hey everyone, and welcome to this explainer. Today, we're diving into a really fascinating but honestly pretty concerning paradox right at the heart of the Philippine education system. Over the last few decades, primary enrollment rates have absolutely soared. On paper, it looks like a massive win. But here's the catch. It's kind of ironic how quickly we celebrate those enrollment numbers while totally ignoring the empty desks come graduation day. As we'll see in the data today, we're dealing with something known as the access illusion. Basically, the system is fantastic at opening doors, but it struggles significantly to keep students inside as they get older. So we're going to explore exactly why this happens, and more importantly, look at a data-driven blueprint for how to actually fix it.
Which brings us to a central question, right? If education is free, why on earth do students leave? This totally challenges the common assumption that if you just remove tuition fees, boom, success is guaranteed. We tend to assume the barrier is completely gone once the cost is zeroed out. But as we're going to see, simply having a free seat in a classroom doesn't magically erase the heavy socioeconomic pressures waiting for that student the second the bell rings. The reality of poverty is vastly more complex than just a $0 tuition bill.
So we are facing a stark reality check here. We have high primary enrollment, so great access, but that's directly contrasted with really low retention and massive dropout rates in secondary school. Looking at 2020 data from the World Bank, students from low-income families in the Philippines are significantly less likely to actually finish high school. Getting them in the door isn't the problem. The real systemic failure is our inability to keep them there. The system provides entry, sure, but it completely drops the ball on ongoing attendance and actual completion.
The invisible barrier at play here? Opportunity cost. Researchers Psychopoulos and Petrinos highlight this as a massive factor in low-income settings. Because look, even with zero tuition, school isn't actually free, is it? You've got indirect costs like transportation, daily meals, learning materials, but the absolute heaviest burden is lost income. Impoverished families face a literally impossible choice. Do we invest in our child's future education, or do we send them to work just so we can afford food today? These aren't kids who just don't want to learn. These are families trying to survive day to day.
And that economic pressure? It builds into this devastating, step-by-step trap. First, poverty and those hidden costs put immediate stress on a student. Because of that stress, they might have to miss days to work or help out at home, which, naturally, directly causes poor academic performance. Falling behind breeds frustration, which then sparks disengagement and eventually dropout. And without a degree, that student lands right back in generational poverty. The cycle just resets for the next generation. It's a cascading failure where financial limitations inevitably snowball into academic frustration and permanent withdrawal.
Historically, the go-to fix for this has been conditional cash transfers, paying families to keep kids in school. But as the Asian Development Bank pointed out back in 2018, financial support alone is not enough to close gaps in instructional quality. Cash transfers are kind of just a reactive patch. They lower the immediate economic barrier, and they definitely get kids in the seat. But if the teaching effectiveness and classroom conditions are still weak, the student isn't really learning. We've been so hyper-focused on access, we actually forgot to invest in the learning processes that make staying in school worthwhile in the first place.
To sum up where the current system is going wrong, we're looking at three critical systemic blind spots. First up, delayed intervention. Support usually only kicks in when a student is already failing or literally has one foot out the door. That is way too late. Second, a fragmented policy approach. Education initiatives and social welfare programs are operating in total silos instead of working together. And third, a complete lack of predictive systems. Schools just don't have the tools to identify at-risk students before they fall behind, which means vulnerable kids just quietly slip through the cracks.
So how do we change this? Let's move into Section 1, the fix. Specifically, the Integrated Early Warning and Support System, or IEWSS.
This brings us to a proposed structural overhaul with a super ambitious goal, cutting student dropout rates by 30 to 50% within a 5-year period. That is huge. It relies on a brilliantly simple 3-layered intervention model that perfectly matches the intensity of support with a student's specific risk level. At the universal layer, all students get basic support, like school feeding programs. Now, if a student flags as at risk, they move to the targeted layer for extra academic and financial help. And finally, high-risk students get intensive intervention. We're talking personalized case management and family-centered strategies to tackle those really complex barriers we mentioned earlier.
To actually make those layers work, the system leans on 5 core components. You've got early grade literacy programs for grades 1 through 3 to make sure foundational learning issues are fixed early on. Then conditional retention support, which ties financial aid not just to being enrolled, but to actually showing up. Attendance matters. You also have school-based support units putting social workers and counselors right inside the schools. Plus, flexible learning for students who absolutely have to work or act as caregivers. And finally, community integration, bringing parents and local government into the fold. It's a whole system approach tackling both academic hurdles and non-school barriers.
Which brings us to Section 2, catching students before they fall, utilizing the predictive risk model. Let's look at the data-driven heart of this policy.
So how do we actually know who needs the support? Well, we stop guessing and start knowing by calculating a specific risk score for every single student. Look at what carries the heaviest weight in this formula. Attendance, right there at 25%. If a kid isn't showing up, that is a massive red flag. The formula also factors in academic test scores at 20%, socioeconomic proxies like household income at another 20%, behavior at 15%, and geography and family background making up the final 20%. By weighting all these factors together, schools get an incredibly accurate, proactive picture of the exact pressures a student is facing.
All of those weighted factors are then standardized into a simple score from 0 to 100, and a score between 70 and 100, that is the critical threshold. Crossing into that high-risk range isn't just a data point on a spreadsheet, it triggers immediate, intensive case management. It turns that data into urgent action. It literally tells the school-based support units to step in today, engage the family, and build a personalized intervention plan before that student just vanishes from the roster.
In the day-to-day operations of a school, this creates a continuous, 5-step workflow designed for a really intuitive dashboard. First, teachers do monthly data entry. Then, the dashboard runs automated risk scoring. Step 3, it immediately flags high-risk students. Step 4, the school assigns interventions based on that 3-layered model we talked about. And lastly, they track outcomes to see if the intervention actually worked, adjusting things as necessary. It establishes this continuous, data-driven safety net right at the ground level.
So, will we keep reacting to empty desks? Or will we finally build the safety net to keep students in them? The data from the sources we've explored today is crystal clear. To truly break the cycle of poverty, just getting students to enroll simply isn't enough. A proactive, data-driven system like the IEWSS might just be our best shot at ensuring access actually results in sustained learning, rather than just a temporary spike in enrollment numbers. Think about that the next time you hear about a new initiative boasting purely about getting kids in the door. Thanks so much for joining me on this explainer, and as always, keep learning.